Welcome to What the Hex, your source for Warhammer Underworlds in 30 frames per second or less. My name is Davey. I'm your co-host, and with me as always I got Phil. How you doing, Phil?
I'm doing all right.
Yeah. And blast from the past, we got Aaron. How are you, Aaron?
Pretty good, and let me tell you, the past has been wild.
Excellent. Let's talk to some people who are coming at us from the future. We are talking to the Warhammer Underworlds online team. How are y'all doing?
We're good, thanks. Doing pretty well.
All right, good deal. Hey, as always, we come at you with the context of when we're recording. We are dropping you this episode. We're recording. Beastgrave has been announced. It is on its way. It's within 2 weeks. It's going to be here. It's an exciting time, but it's also an exciting time for those people who want to play Underworlds on their computer, and that's what we were talking about mostly today. We're going to get back to that in a second. As always, I want to say thanks to anyone who reached out to this show. Whether you've done that via email or our Twitter at WTHcast. For community shoutouts, as we often do, I want to say thanks to the people who are creating great content out there. And I wish we had the opportunity to do this before, but Stephen Van is one of my favorite bloggers, and he has put out some great stuff about the transition from Season 2 to Season 3. So go check out Call It Shadespire. Aaron, Phil, you got anything else to jump on for community shoutouts?
Not particularly, although that name is going to be a little ironic now that Shadespire is being phased out.
Oof. I'll shout out the Underworlds subreddit. Every time you guys have a new What the Hex episode, I post it up there, and we get some good feedback there. So for you Redditors out there who follow What the Hex there, hey, keep doing what you're doing. Have a good one.
You guys are all right. All right. So our next section is What the Hex is going on with you. This is where we talk about what's been up with you in the hobby. And Aaron, it's been a while since we talked to you. Aaron, what are you doing in the Warhammer Underworlds hobby?
Oh gosh, so much. It's been so long, but let's focus on the recent. In that I just recently put together my chosen axes are all assembled and ready to hit the table, and then I did spray. What do you call it? Spray base coat. My Iron Skulls boys. So perfect. I'm harkening back to the Shadespire warbands, but those guys are ready to get some paint on them. I did it in black like an idiot, but it's too late now. What are you gonna do? And otherwise, still trying to get my hands on different promos. I feel like I've acquired a few more recently, and looking forward to seeing what Beastgrave has to offer in the near future.
There we go. How about you, Phil? What you been up to?
Just sort of getting the last hurrahs in with all those Shadespire cards before they're phased out. So I played a really crazy Reavers deck where you try to kill all your own fighters this past weekend, and it was a lot of fun. I'm going to be a little...
Can we say crazy with a capital C? Possibly a capital RAZY as well?
I was going to say with a capital K for corn.
Yeah, all right.
But yeah, it was very crazy. I had an opponent who legitimately did not want to play me again, which was interesting.
He hit you at one game to one, and it was time for the decider, the tiebreaker, and he said his brain was swelling too much from trying to play against this deck, so he bowed out.
Brand ambassador Phil.
How about you, Davey?
For myself, I put a lot of time into practicing with the Thorns. We went down to Rockford, went down to Cataclysm Games and played there. Obviously, we had a very small turnout, but did well with them. I really enjoyed learning the hold objective playstyle, and I'm excited to see what Beastgrave brings for that. If it changes up what that is, and obviously the rotation is going to change that, even if Beastgrave doesn't. So. That said, let's talk about who we got on this call. So we're going to talk to the team working on Warhammer Underworlds online. What I'm going to ask you is, give me your name, give me what you've been doing in the hobby lately, and if you've been totally consumed by your work on bringing the game up, then at least give us what your favorite warband is out of that. So, Neil, I'm going to start off with you.
Hello, how you doing? So yeah, I'm Neil Renison. I am the founder of Steel Sky Productions, and the person that runs the whole thing. I guess I'm the boss. So we've been having a few new employees start over the last few weeks. So I've been playing quite a few games. I actually had a really great game the other day with Thundrix, which was awesome. I'd never played with them before. I'm quite excited because one of our investors actually borrowed a load of our stuff and took my favourite Chosen Axes deck away with them, and it only just arrived back in the office the other day, and so I can't wait to get back into that. So very excited.
All right. Who else we got there?
All right, I'm Clinton. I'm the technical producer and designer on Warhammer Underworlds Online. In terms of the hobby, I actually went to a tournament on the weekend. I went and played in a local Melbourne tournament at one of the friendly local game stores. And I took Iron Skull's boys with a deck that I had cobbled together with zero preparation and just kind of turned up and hoped for the best.
Sounds like the best preparation.
Yeah. It's like I like to, make poor decisions with little preparation. And I think the Oryx do a really good job of embracing that. Did better than I thought. Ended up coming 4th out of 9.
Very nice.
Was
Very
managed to win 2 out of my 3 rounds on the day.
And you said Eyes the Nine won that tourney.
Yeah, Eyes of the Nine.
Woo!
9 players, 9 different warbands, so no double ups, and Eyes of the Nine took it out with just a fearsome deck. It was basically Vortimus Voltron, just piling sprays on the Vortimus and just casting a ton of spells. It was apparently terrifying to go against, and luckily I managed to avoid that.
Well, with 9 players, it was meant to be.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's easy mode. If there's 9 players, obviously the Eyes player is going to win. So, excellent, very cool. And I'm glad 2 out of 3 with Iron Skulls is no small feat. So, kudos to you, sir. Who else we got out there?
Hey, I'm Matt. I'm the lead programmer on the project. I've been kind of going flat chat on the project for now. Been playing with some of the new employees that we got here. But most of the time is just kind of spent dealing with cards and working through how we're going to implement cards, which is always interesting because it's very interesting to actually, when you first kind of like try to digitally structure what a written card is like, and then you go over it one time and then you realize that you did it completely incorrectly because of wording is slightly different, and you have to go over it again, and then you're like, oh, and then also what about this case? And so there's a lot of back and forth on that. But I have just been kind of working on that primarily. I love to play a lot of the older Shadespire warband, so it is a bit of a shame that they're going to get rolled out. I would love to, get back into Reavers. It's actually the same thing. We just got our Reavers, our painted Reavers miniatures back from that same investor. So all this time I've just been playing with Red Boys instead of them as they're painted, in all their painted glory.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's pretty good. If I could give a shout out to that bloke on the subreddit who keeps writing all of those Chosen Axes blog posts, comparing Chosen Axes to playing Go and stuff like that. That stuff is fantastic. So,
Excellent.
I think he just did a great one just about all of the possible board placements, like the best board placements for getting all of the Chosen Axes inspired early on.
Wow.
It's fantastic content. So
I
Check
think
that out.
Yeah, absolutely. What I love is that there is so much room for innovation in this game that you can go very, very deep and this fella and figure out how I'm gonna follow the Chosen Axes rabbit hole down to the very very, very bottom, and that makes it makes it a great game, and that's why we're doing this podcast. So as we talked about, our episode today is focused on talking about Warhammer Underworlds Online. About I would say maybe 3 months ago, and by the time you hear this, maybe closer to 3.5, 4 months ago, you heard Ready for Action do an interview. We thought this was a great time to do this because the closed beta has just gone up and almost immediately filled up. There was a huge amount of interest, and I can understand it. There's so much to gain from this game by repetitions, and folks who are able to do that in their downtime. If they can't get out, like myself as a parent of 2 young children, it's a great way to be able to play extra games. So a lot of people are trying to engage with this. We'll be excited for this to drop. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk to you about what has progressed since you talked to the Ready for Action folks, and big shout out, big thanks to those guys. They're doing great stuff there. They got their own YouTube channel. So it's possible if you're listening to this episode, you might not have heard that earlier thing from Ready for Action. So we're gonna do a little backtracking. I think this one's for Neil. You are doing the computer slash online slash whatever adaptation of the game that we love a lot, Shadespire Night Vault slash Warhammer Underworlds Online. What made this connection happen? Like what said Games Workshop is going to work with Steel Sky Productions to do this game? Like, how did this happen? Was it Games Workshop approached you? Did they put something up and you said we'd like to do it, and you had to justify why it would be you would be the team to do it?
So yeah, we've got to go back in time a fair bit actually. So a lot of the team that are working on this game are actually a part of Tin Man Games. And Tin Man Games has been a company that's been running in Melbourne for about 11 years. Primarily, Tin Man Games has mainly created apps and video games based on sort of choose your own adventure books. We used to do a lot of stuff using the Fighting Fantasy license and various other licenses. I think we did like a Judge Dredd one, but most importantly, we did a Warhammer 40,000 conversion into like a digital app. Oh gosh, it was probably about 4 years ago.
Yeah, Herald of Oblivion.
It's called Legacy of Dawn, Herald of Oblivion. That came out on sort of Apple and Google smartphones, and then later on Steam. And so we already had a relationship with Games Workshop, and it was, that we delivered that game really well, and we were really pleased with it. And then fast forward a few years, we actually took one of those game books and turned it into like a digital board game, which was the Warlock of Firetop Mountain, which we released on Steam, and most recently it has also come out on Nintendo Switch, which was very exciting. And from there, we actually worked with Sony to develop a game called Table of Tales: The Crooked Crown, which was released in April of this year for PlayStation VR. And the pitch to Sony at the time was what would happen if you took the movie Jumanji and crossed it with Dungeons and Dragons and virtual reality. And so this game is kind of like a Table of Tales. Is kind of like you find yourself in an attic and you're placed at a table. There's a mechanical talking bird who is kind of like the dungeon master, and she narrates the story to you, and the table comes to life, and you have to move these little miniatures around on a table, play cards, roll dice. You have a little party. You could call it a warband, I guess. So you're playing cards and rolling dice, and so we were making a game that involved miniatures and dice and cards.
Yep.
And so I was looking around for what the next project could be. And Games Workshop were obviously it was the early days of talking about Shadespire. And it literally just was an approach to the people that I know there. And I told them what we'd been working on with Table of Tales. And I thought that we were very well placed to take on their license. They said, sure, sounds amazing, do as a pitch. And so we went into quite a long and lengthy pitching process, and hey, they gave it to us, and we were absolutely over the moon with that. So that's kind of how it came to be, really. And that was probably about 18 months ago.
Yeah, close to 2 years now.
Yeah.
From the whole process kicked off.
So that's how we're making the game at the moment.
When you talk about the lifespan of this game, like it has been in existence from the gamer perspective. It's been around for a little less than 2 years. So like this, your part of this has been in progress since the inception of the game, which is kind of crazy to think about. For folks who are not familiar with the development of games and such, like that might be surprising. To me it would be like that. That's outside of my realm of knowledge, I should say. So and that's going to feed into a lot of the discussion we're going to have here. We put a call out to our listeners for questions they might have. Let's jump into it. So we've talked about what triggered the idea for this partnership, how it came about. Let's talk about what we know about. So you're going to release this game, and you may not have a date for when you think it's going to come out. You may have a rough idea. We do know that the closed beta has just come out, and it filled up incredibly fast. You have a Discord, and we'll link that in the show notes. And you put out a call, it filled up. You put out a little bit more, and that filled up again immediately. Those are the people who are going to test it. Do you have any sense of when this, as a whole, as a complete product, is going to release?
Absolute silence in the room.
Yeah.
We definitely have a sense, but we have a pretty clear concept of it, but we are kind of keeping that close to our chest, I suppose you could say.
Yeah, no official announcements yet.
Yeah. But yeah, we're pretty confident with the product as it's standing right now, I guess.
Fair enough.
Very cold for referring to it. Yes, I'm too close to the coal face to see anything else. It's just a product. It's like a jug of milk at this point to me. So, but yeah.
Fair enough. Talk to me about what people can expect to see when they see the release. Like what warbands are we going to see, and what are we going to see as far as? So I would say the typical listener for our podcast is somebody who has been with the game since Shadespire. So they got on board when it was Shadespire was Reavers versus Steelhearts, but they are interested in playing your game. What are they going to see when they download you off of Steam, which they can do, and we'll talk a little bit more about wish list and all that sort of thing. But what are they gonna see when they first get your game on board?
If they grab the game in early access on launch, they'll be seeing Steelhearts and Magors as the opening two warbands. We decided to mix it up a little bit because we want to sort of play with the release list of the warbands so that we could launch them in a slightly different order. We wanted to make sure we weren't just recreating the meta from Shadespire, like straight off the bat. It would be a shame if we get a couple of months into our launch and everyone's just like, all right, so what were the best decks winning tournaments when Shadespire was released and Sepulchral and Oryx were just out there. That's kind of that's not as interesting as kind of releasing the warbands and the cards in a different order so that people still have to do some deck building and find out what works with the resources that they have.
When we're recording right now, we're looking at Beastgrave is about to arrive. So we're looking at the arrival of Season 3. And as your game arrives, it is almost like a reboot of Season 1. So you've talked about looking at the initial warbands, and you went with Steelhearts and Magor's Fiends. How did that impact? I think a listener is wondering, are we looking at a total recreation of Season 1 Universals? So there's 437 plus the leader cards, that's 60. So let's say 497, just shy of 500 cards in the Season 1. Are you looking at attempting to recreate that, or are you going in a different direction?
No, we'll be attempting to be as close as 1-to-1 eventually with Shadespire as we go forwards. We definitely want to make sure that we get all the universals from the Shadespire season in, and as many of the leader cards as well. And it's just that the order we tackle them in, and the warbands that we release during that period of time might not be in the same order as what you're expecting from the original Shadespire tabletop game.
Yeah, we're not constrained to the normal structure of how they have released the cards in terms of warbands coming with all the universals. So we're hoping to be able to work with considering what universals were kind of we think are going to be the most interesting for people to play with, and also what ones are actually robustly make for a bit more of a robust deck building experience. and work around say cards that are less important as well, I suppose. But it certainly isn't like a thing where we would just put the less important ones on the back burner. It's more of understanding how we can progress forward in our own way with the cards, I guess.
Could you talk more about like what the decision process looks like and how you determine which cards you move forward with, or in what order you're going in? Like how do you guys even decide, or like what's the metrics that you sort of go through to determine, well, this card's in for the time being or this card's out for the time being?
So it's like, it's not we just have a rough process, and the approach I take is I went through season 1 cards and picked out the most common cards that you see in decks, like in tournament decks, and
okay.
Also making note of anything that's restricted, and of course anything that's banned. Once you've done that pass, you do another pass over the set, looking for cards that you could define as aggro for aggressive decks, ones that suit defensive decks, ones that suit more control or objective style, or anything that's kind of a flex approach, cards that kind of fit into multiple different types of decks, and you kind of we categorize the cards by that, and then it's a case of basically picking out what we think would be good for the next sort of card release, and putting them together, and then we have to look at them and look at how easy they are to implement, and the time we have, so that we can manage our, basically we need to make sure the cards get done. So we have to make sure that what we're committing to is a reasonable amount of work, and that's how we kind of break the cards up into different releases.
Fair.
That's neat. Have you found the difficulty of implementing a given card has weighed heavily on like the decision? Like, have there been really complicated ones that you've just had to throw up your arms and say, all right, we're gonna have to push this one back because it's been, it's complicated enough that it'd be tricky to implement at this time frame?
Yeah, we definitely, like, if it's something that is like going to be really like an absolute pain in the ass to implement, we sort of go, all right, cool. We might need to like set aside some more time for this. But yeah, it's okay. It does heavily affect how we choose which cards. But if it's a fun card, if it's a card that we think is going to work, we might be like, it's going to be tough, but let's just get this in the game now.
It hasn't been a problem so far, just because we've actually been quite lucky with the ones, and it has been luck in that, like, conceptually when we were picking out the cards for at least for early access, we didn't have a pipeline for developing them, because this was much earlier on in making the game. But now that we do, we've actually, now we are actually developing cards in the game. We were actually quite lucky in that the ones we picked out, for the most part, have been they've been quite straightforward to implement. So we haven't had to push anything back in terms of universals or faction cards and go, oh, this is, getting into really tough territory to develop in a digital space. But that's not going to be true for all of the cards because, especially getting into Nightvault, there are some much more whack cards coming out. And the hard thing about, making it in a board game sphere is that, like, if Dave wanted to make a card that's like, point to the person to your left and they buy you a Pepsi, like they would be within their realms to do it because they're able to do that in a physical space. But how are we going to translate that into a digital space, really?
I just like the idea of GW coming, like, creating that card just to mess with you.
But like, it's going to be good so far. There are some ones. It's interesting because it does help. It means that it's interesting for us when we also review the newer cards that are coming out, because it's fascinating to kind of see how we will have to extend the logic of the game. Say, for instance, the stuff I know in Nightvault now, they have the stuff about, score this objective if you lost the roll-off in all 3 rounds, which is obviously something that we wouldn't have implemented as a trigger if we were just designing around Shadespire. So we have to, rework conceptually how the triggers are working for certain things in the game. So, yeah.
Sure. The only exception to the sort of how we choose cards is when it comes to sort of warband only cards. Of course, if we're launching with a warband, we will be including all the warband cards that come with that are found in their various expansions.
The faction-specific cards, the warband.
Yeah, the faction-specific cards, and because those are going to be part of the planned DLC for our game, where basically once you bought the base game, you're going to have Those are Steel Hearts and Gauze, and another 2 warbands included. And then after that, we'll be selling each warband with their faction cards for that's
pretty much the
Universal cards, however, won't be paid for. They won't be part of the DLC. They'll be included as free updates.
Excellent.
Oh, awesome.
So anybody who's heard that statement is going to wonder what the +2 warbands are going to be. Is that something you're prepared to share at this point, or is that still under development?
Not at this point, but we will be announcing those very soon, I think.
Yeah, I think we're planning a stream, but we might announce the third one.
Yeah.
Stream.
So it's just around the corner.
Fair enough.
Awesome.
You've already talked about cards that are banned. How are you incorporating the banned and restricted list into the development of Warhammer Underworlds Online?
With the banned cards, it's probably not worth our while to implement them. It's like they've been banned for a reason, so we'll probably leave those. But never say never. But in terms of like assigning our time, we want to make sure we're getting cards that people can play with into the game as soon as possible. As for restricted cards, we have a plan for how to basically put them into the game, and we will definitely be doing by the end of the season, the restricted list will be in effect. So those cards will be in, and you will have the same restrictions that you have with deck building currently.
Yeah, we can say that there won't be really a necessity for restricted for the restricted system early on into the release of the game. But it will definitely be much more important later on as we get more and more of the restricted cards in. But we have a kind of a plan of how we're going to be, bringing them out so that then, they don't end up dominating the meta in the way that kind of some of them do already. So,
yeah, it's a case of making sure that there's no point having a restricted list if there's only 5 restricted cards
that's kind
in the game.
But then the flip side of that is if there's only 5 restricted cards, it also means that you can end up with quite a stale meta. So you got to kind of find the sweet spot in there. If you have 5 of them, everybody's just going to put them all in the deck. We got to find a sweet spot there, really.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that when somebody's building a deck in Warhammer Underworlds Online, they will have their usual 12 objectives. 10 or more gambits, 10 or more upgrades, at least half of which must be upgrades, and then no more than 5 of which can be restricted. That's going to be a very familiar deck building.
Eventually, it's definitely going to be like that with the restricted system. Yeah, we will be implementing that once we get enough of the restricted cards in that it becomes, the very important element of deck building.
So in terms of pushing in new cards, how long on average is it taking you to code cards into the game? And do you have a sense of do you have a backlog, I guess, so that if there are those just sort of gaps in what's available in the card pool that you could quickly push something out, or would there have to be a sort of planned delay?
We don't have a backlog because we are planning on anything that we are working on now being in early access, on the release. So we are planning for a backlog right now. We are planning ahead with releases, but we haven't necessarily started implementing those cards. But the pipeline is it's more of a thing where we'll just need to I don't know. I don't know how much I want to kind of say about the card pipeline. Sorry.
No, that's fair. That's totally
I'm trying
fair.
to work around what I could kind of say about.
I mean, it's worth saying that there will be regular drops of universal cards across the lifetime of the game. So if you're part of the ecosystem and you're playing the game, we'll hopefully get into a bit of a routine of doing regular drops. So and they'll be free. They're planned to be free.
Across the board, we should be getting regular card drops into the game. If you talk about it on an individual card level, some cards we can do in 5 minutes, and some cards will take
a week.
It genuinely can be that kind of difference, because some cards are nice and easy, and some cards we really do just kind of have to sit down and really work through them.
But that's kind of the scope of we're definitely trying to make it as close to the actual physical version. So that's why, it's really coming from a place of we're not wanting to change the design to fit the digital sphere as much as try to rework the digital sphere around, getting the actual cards in as people like to play them right now. So because of that, we're pretty dedicated to, working out how we can solve all of these tabletop issues within the digital space, really.
So anybody who's listened to the Ready for Action interview knows that like what came up was this conflict in if we are going to represent this game in an online situation, the 3D versus 2D. Like, so how do we represent this thing where we have 3D constructions, which the 2D game is used to like negotiating without any difficulty whatsoever. So they figure out like, okay, like these objectives are going to retreat into the ground, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But like, what's the biggest barrier as far as like translating it from the tabletop game to the online game?
So I think probably the easiest way to describe it, or the best way I've come up with to describe it, is like taking a tabletop game and converting it to digital is like having an amazing butler for your game who is also the world's worst rules lawyer. You have the digital game can like set up a board for you and do so many things so much quicker and just give you like the outcomes of dice rolls and attacks and
tokens, looks after all the tokens for you.
Yeah, it handles all that wonderfully. But on the flip side, it also stops it. Like, we'll want to stop at every point and make sure that that you are taking into account every single rule in the exact order it needs to be played out. And it's making sure you find a balance between those two things. You want to make sure that the butler side is going nice and smoothly, but you also want to make sure the rules lawyer is doing their job but not getting in the way of the player trying to play the game.
Yeah, I would say that the largest difficulty, the two kind of like big things, and one of the two big problems that we've had in converting it from the tabletop version are like conceptually is kind of like about, as you're talking about, like, turning the kind of 2D-ish environments into more of a 3D world, really wanting to like present Shadespire as an actual kind of like place, as opposed to, being just the board layouts that we kind of get represented of it in the tabletop game. And then also like the cards. But in terms of the environment stuff, we have a really good team for kind of like they've really taken it and made it their own thing, the art team, in terms of how they presented that. And they do, like, they have some really good solutions for stuff like the objectives and how we're presenting, how the boards are actually supposed to feel in the world. Because, it's very weird that it's supposed to be presented as these hex boards, but it's also, part of the world. So how they're kind of like structuring, that it's almost like this tiling that, that the Cataphragms had throughout the city is very interesting. But yeah, in terms of like the other big difficulty is really translating stuff that a lot of like board game players would take for granted into digital rules, and kind of understanding all of the little trigger points and how, because also the good thing about the game is that it's really written from a very conversational standpoint, which obviously they're actually moving a bit further away from because keywording is a very handy thing for a lot of people to understand how mechanics specifically work. But especially during Shadespire, a lot of it was written from the perspective of, at the end of a round, do this thing, or, score this immediately when this happens. So it's very conversational. And we have to try to turn that conversational language into more of a digital language.
Yeah.
So that's a big hurdle for us. But, it's only as fun. Like, it's not like, say, it's something that's worthwhile to tackle. Yeah.
Yeah, those discrepancies between like the English language and code is fun to grapple with sometimes.
Sure.
So it seems like the direction the game's going is that we are seeing a lot more of the keywording. Are you excited about that development? Is it gonna make your lives easier having sort of like codified words to like implement it into the game?
I'm personally excited. I can't speak for the company. My boss has given me a bit of a half and half.
Evil eyes.
Yeah. No. We're quite excited for Beastgrave overall. So
yeah, those keywords are definitely going to be good.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so another thing that you were talking about that piqued my interest is sort of the board setup. So obviously the boards serve both a visual and sort of setting component, but obviously they're very mechanical as well.
Yeah.
Do we expect the game, as it relates to the boards, is going to work similarly? Are folks going to be choosing their own battlefields? Is that sort of alignment still going to work the same way?
Yeah, so we haven't. I don't think we have shown that off publicly, but the aim is really to present the board layout. So everything from just the board choice and the board placement and objective placement. It kind of happens in a pre-game scene where when both of the players are loading into the environment, once they've connected to the server, they are both loading into the environment, and then during that time, we're also asking them to, choose their boards, choose the placement, choose where the objectives are going. And then once they're finished, fully loading into the environment, then they'll be able to actually go into the scene. So it happens in a kind of a 2D environment where you actually, choose all of that stuff. And then once you actually get into the 3D space of Shadespire, the boards have been laid out, all of the objectives are there. And then you choose to place your fighters, redraw your cards, and all of that stuff. So we've split the start of the match into kind of two different segments, where one of them happens before, this whole rendered environment comes in, and then the other half kind of happens during that time when the rendered environment is there.
Sure.
But yeah, from a gameplay perspective, the board setup is exactly the same as what you would do
mechanics
in the tabletop game.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. And so it sounds like we've talked about the cards, and you're trying to implement them as faithfully to the tabletop game as possible. And we've got our board situation, and that's going to be implemented again as faithfully as possible. Are there examples of, I guess, things that you're implementing in the game or not implementing in the game that are going to diverge from the tabletop version of it?
Ideally, no.
I think that you might find that a few of the cards will have to diverge, but they will only diverge from structurally how you think about them, not actually how they mechanically work. I don't know whether I should talk about predatory leap. So
it sounds like you have an example.
So there is one in the base.
Predatory leap's fine to talk about.
So we have predatory leap is the upgrade that Riptooth can have, where when Riptooth does a charge, he can move through other fighters, which is obviously the same thing. You can't finish on another fighter's hex or anything. Structurally, it's a bit hard because the computer or the system, once it gets the request for doing an activation, it doesn't really understand how to formulate. I'm going to do a charge, but I'm going to charge through another person. So but how we're going to be getting around that is really considering predatory leap more as its own little action that Riptooth can do. And then once you've chosen to do that action, it reformulates all of the charging and, goes, okay, these are the things that you can do with this. So really, instead of it being in the tabletop game, it would be Riptooth can now just move through other fighters if I'm doing a charge. But in the digital game, it would be more okay, I'm activating Riptooth. I could charge normally, or I could choose to do predatory leap, which then reworks the charging so that I can path through people. So it's kind of stuff like that where cards will be changed, but we are still trying to make them work the same way. They'll just be how you consider them, which is kind of the thing I'm interested in. Is hopefully, I'm pretty keen to get a lot of the players to kind of, hopefully over the course of the game, they understand more about the nuts and bolts of how we have structured the game, which will help them consider, more of how they can use cards in a better way. And I think that is also the very interesting thing is that our meta, I think, will evolve very quickly because of it just being a digital space, and people understanding how cards are really working at a fundamental point. And there's no arguing back and forth between two players about how a card works because the computer will just be well, no, this person's right and you're wrong.
So the question is going to be, and this is happening now.
Yeah. It won't even be the question. The computer's no, I'm right. So,
Do you ever wonder, or maybe this has come up, do you ever come up against whether or not a card is actually implemented correctly, or the computer is actually doing the right thing versus, compared to what the card is actually saying? Have there been any issues where you're not actually sure how a card is supposed to work in a given situation?
Oh, yeah. We definitely have had a lot of times, and I mean, this is across the board with the rules, is that we will often think, that there will be ways that we have considered the rules, and then also, some of the other people that we might talk to in the community might let us know about stuff that we hadn't considered, or different little facets of it. So, every now and then that kind of thing happens.
Yeah, it's making sure that we double check the errata and a lot of it is double checking. Like, we'll put something in the game and then someone will be like, and what about this scenario? And you're like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, it's actually meant to work like this.
There's
all right, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, luckily the errata is very comprehensive, so a lot of the time that catches it. We might have had one or two things where we found a scenario where it may not be in the errata, but yeah.
So it sounds like you have a pretty open communication line to the community and probably to GW as well if you have other questions. Was that something you planned going into this, knowing that you wanted to have this very open development strategy, or is that just something that sort of built up organically as you started having to try and figure out how to code all these cards?
That's tough. I mean, obviously we speak to Games Workshop a lot, and we're across a lot of the things that they do. And if we have any questions about anything from card design to the tone or the look of something, they're the first people that we talk to. As for the community, we've always known that because this is going to be a live ops online game, that we would have a community, and we'd probably have a community of very, very passionate people such as yourselves, who wanted to know what we were doing. And I think a lot of this, a lot of the success of this game is about sort of transparency between us and the community, and just trying to let the fans know what's coming, to let the fans know how we're doing things. I mean, it's one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast today, really, to sort of pull the curtain back a little bit. Yeah. So I think moving forward, we'll be very community centric. We've actually just hired a community manager who will be handling all that stuff. And historically, we've not had that role before in the studio. So it's going to be super important moving forward.
And so then with this beta, is that I assume there's feedback you're hoping to get from the community. Is there any sort of specific things you're hoping to see come out of that open beta, or is it more just from we need to get more eyes on how this is working from a mechanics standpoint, just to flesh out more bugs?
Yeah, it's definitely a get more eyes sort of exercise. We definitely want to see more people. Like, we want to get just what people think of the game. Like, let them know. Let us know and find whatever bugs and problems will undoubtedly crop up.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. It's definitely the thing is there's a lot more creative players in the community than we can be creative with playing our own game. So I think that there will be a certain amount of stuff cropping up that will just be fascinating little behaviors between fighters or between cards, and that will really help us work out some more of the kinks in the game, and think about how we're designing cards, and
and help us prioritize what we're going to work on next as well. That sort of feedback.
Well, that is definitely the other thing is also getting feedback about what the community feels that we should be prioritizing as well. It's a pretty important thing.
We have a handful of community questions that we should address here. So Michael Carlin, he wants to know, is there any sort of tie-in with the physical competitive game to the online one? So like if you're crushing it on the competitive level in the physical game, like does that translate to anything, or vice versa? So like do you anticipate a competitive scene with the online game?
Definitely, like in terms of developing a competitive scene for the online game, yes. Like we definitely want to head in that direction. It's something that we need to build up to, but it's very it would be like we want to run tournaments and that sort of stuff. That would be cool. In terms of tie-overs with the physical game,
I mean, look, we have lots of big level discussions about lots of different opportunities and things that we could do. At the moment, we're just concentrating on getting the game out for early access. But who knows? I mean, look, let's get this game out. Let's get everybody love playing it. Let's make it a success, and we'll have those discussions moving forward, I guess.
Let's talk about the game as it exists. Like, the default is that we're one player versus one player. Is there any sense in the future that you would take a look at the multiplayer versus the, let's say, Glass-Minded Gargant, the different play styles that are presented?
Look, we'd like to do all the things, but again, it comes down to the fact that it's a bit of baby steps. We've got to get this into early access. We've got to get a whole load of people playing it and enjoying it and building up the community, and then we'll take it from there and see. I think
the main focus is really on the 1v1 during early access, so that we can get to the point where everybody is very satisfied with playing the experience, like the base experience of Warhammer Underworlds. But yeah, that's the joy of this game, is, as you say, like, there's a lot of depth that people can go into, and there's a lot of extendability into areas that we can, design into, and
Sure.
Yeah, and like we play a bunch of the Glass-Mad Gargant in the office when we get a chance, and they are like 3 to 4 player games.
Yeah, if we got 7 hours free, we'll play the 3 to 4 player game. Take a little while when everybody's sitting back, stacking relics on Severin.
Usually done on a Friday evening after a few beers, and that sort of extends the game quite a bit.
Like, the people who are listening right now, they're wondering, like, what is it like? Are you working through the Shadespire warbands and then approaching the Night Vault warbands, or is it more fluid than that? Like.
So we have a really good plan of what we want to release, and obviously we're working on various warbands at the moment, but we can't talk about what they're going to be, but we'll obviously release that information as soon as we can to the community.
One of the things we can guarantee is the universal cards, in terms of that is content that the players will be getting. Warbands, the specific order of warbands is more nebulous, and because we are fully expecting people to really be keen, to get whoever their favorite warband is separately, but the universal cards are the thing that we want to guarantee to players in terms of a big amount of content that they can play around with from just having the base game.
So
the great thing for us is that we have an awesome amount of content between Shadespire and Night Vault to play with, and it's just great fun actually just having meetings to discuss what we want to work on next.
And what order we want to tackle it in.
So you're saying if there's somebody who is distraught over their inability to take Ready for Action in their deck coming into the Beastgrave meta, they could pick up this game and a little more Ready for Action play to get them by.
Yeah, eke out the last of those little Ready for Action dregs, the little misery dregs here that you give to other people. Definitely. And, that was the initial plan. We were just going to, this is a joke, I'll preface by this, saying that we were just initially going to release, Great Concussion and Ready for Action, and that was the only two. But,
great for
safe matter.
Yeah.
But, no more. They, the bean can has pushed back on that. They said the game will never sell, so.
Fair enough.
On a more serious note, but we are trying to, like, our first season will be kind of like a Shadespire nostalgia trip. Like, if you're that's very much what we would like the game to be.
But a nostalgia trip with a bit more hindsight, hopefully, so we can actually plan around some of the bigger the bigger meta defining events.
And an alternate history Shadespire season.
Well, and I think that's a great point to make. Like, this game was incredible. It was great to play during the Shadespire season. And on this podcast, we talked a bunch about how, like, we think this game is at its best when the meta is in flux. And this is another way to play this game when the meta is in flux.
It's our very own meta, really.
Yeah, and I love flux. I love things changing, and it makes things exciting.
And the other thing just to add is here as well is that we'll be party to kind of a lot of analytics that come through from people playing the game. So we'll start to see trends of people doing certain things and playing certain ways, and that might dictate the way we design the meta out anyway as well. So,
like which cards we decide to take next, which warbands we decide to work on next, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, that's excellent. I think any number of our listeners are going to be excited to see where you take this next. I know that the closed beta is already out there and it's already filled up. So there's already a number of our listeners who are already partaking. I think it's an exciting time, whether you're looking forward to Beastgrave or looking forward to reliving the glory days of Shadespire. Like that's what you guys are able to offer here.
Oh, thank you.
I think that wraps it up. Do we have anything else from Aaron, Phil, or any of the team out there you want to cover or make sure that we talk about before we close it out here tonight?
I think there was just one other question that we had sort of lined up in here that I think would just be a fun one for people to hear, and that what are you guys all most proud of from your work on the game, and what have you been happiest about getting done so far?
I think from the guy that runs the company, I'm most proud of us working on this game. I think it's an amazing game, and I'm really, really pleased that we're working on it. And I'm also very proud of what the team have produced, and the amount of passion and love that's gone into this thing that they're all creating. And we're super excited to unleash this onto the world. So yeah, that's me.
This is gonna be really obscure and technical, but I actually really like the system we've set up to make the cards. Like our card creation tools have actually been fun to work with, and we can get stuff into the game quickly. I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit, Matt. I know you're.
No, I don't.
I know you're close to it. You can't love our card pipeline, but I do.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of my answer to this, but I don't know. We have internal tools for saving out game states and replays of games and stuff like that, and that's not going to be public facing, at least at the start of early access, but that definitely is something. One of the ways that I've really tried to scope out some of the structure of the game is really have the rules very segregated from the logic of the game, and have the replays very separated from the logic of the game, so that you're able to really from a base level take a replay, put that back into the game or anything like that, but also kind of try to restructure possibly how the logic of the game would be flowing, or the rules of the game would be flowing, and whether we consider in the future how that can kind of affect adding in possibly different modes, like the Gargants and the Arena Mortis, and how players can kind of interact with those modes. But yeah, I would say one of the big things is definitely having all of these tools for saving out your replays. Hopefully, in the future, being able to give replays to other people that they can then just use in their game, which should be very interesting. Spectating games also. This is all stuff that we were kind of working on, and that will be hopefully the feature in a future. But yeah, not necessarily originally at release.
Yeah, it's we're talking about really deep technical sort of tools that make our lives easier, that maybe the players won't necessarily be across initially.
Well, hey, this interview is about you guys.
Yeah. But while I remember, because I know that we have no representatives from the art team here, the game looks amazing, and I have to say I'm really proud of. I have no responsibility for that, but the game is just gorgeous, and it's worth saying that I'm pretty proud of how it looks.
Our art director Ed uses the word tone a lot in the office, and I can safely say that him and the team have really caught the tone of the universe and the world and the game, and I know Games Workshop have been really, really pleased about that.
It being a miniatures-based game, the art, it goes sort of hand in hand with the sort of the work that we're doing here. So that becomes very important. The way a game visually looks draws just as many people to it as the mechanics and the rules do. So it's good to hear that you guys are proud of that development, what you're able to create.
Yeah. It's very good to be able to work on something with such a striking art. Already coming into it with such a striking art design from especially, I don't know, like the Age of Sigmar design to me is very visually striking, and trying to interpret that into the digital sphere is really fun. It's interesting.
Absolutely.
I think what you guys are doing is great. I can't wait for it to be released. I think this provides the opportunity for players to play at a high level against people from all over the world, and I think that's exciting. And I think you can only do good for the game. So I appreciate all the efforts that you guys are putting into this. As far as what are we looking at for the next step after it? So we'll say the closed beta is done. It's filled up. What are you looking at as far as the next step after the closed beta?
Probably to read all the responses from the closed beta.
We'll be doing a stream soon as well,
Yeah,
so hopefully we'll be able to kind of chat with the community a bit more during that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we'll see. We've got there's a whole bunch of things that we need to work through over the next few weeks. But yeah, just keep following our Discord, jumping on our Twitter. We'll be posting news about any new advancements on there. So.
All right. And anyone who needs a link to that, we'll have that in the show notes. That's a link to their Discord, a link to the Twitter, and any of that. So I really want to say thank you to the entire Warhammer Underworlds online team for connecting in with us tonight. We're excited as a podcast. We're excited as a community for what you can bring to this. I think it will be good. So thank you guys for setting the time out in your busy schedule to come talk to us tonight.
No worries at all.
Thanks
it's been
for
fun.
having us. Yeah. Thanks for everything you're doing for the community as well.
Sure, absolutely. So if you want to get in touch with us, you can get us at WTHcast, whatthehexcast@gmail.com. Someone's looking to get in touch with the team there. What would be his best route?
Probably jumping on the Discord. We're pretty regular. A lot of the dev team. We're odd time zones because we're in Australia, but there's usually one or two of us floating around on there.
Yeah, we see a lot of the conversation on there.
All right, and Aaron, if somebody wants to know more about what the Mortal Realms team is doing, what do they do?
Why would they want to? But check out immortalrealms.com for all our Mortal Realms content, all sorts of stuff, cool stuff there.
Your recommended listening for this episode, we're going to kick it over to Phil.
Sure, we got Digital World by Amaranth from their Massive Addictive album.
For What the Hex, I've been Davey.
This is Phil.
This is Aaron.
At Steel Sky Productions, I've been Neil.
I've been Clinton.
I've been Matt.
Why, hello. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep, you're good.
Sounds like we got everybody but the guest
Main
star.
show.
So you've got the most important parts then.
Yeah, Aaron. So we're going to do this episode as if you were Steel Sky Productions.
Oh, I can take it.
I don't know why. I'm seeing a mute icon next to you, Aaron. I don't know what that's all about.
Because I sometimes mute myself and then I unmute myself.
Oh, you fiend.
Is this episode 24?
This is episode, who knows when it's going to come out.
Whenever I roll up on the track, I spit gold, man.